Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Looking at a book this morning which I think is fascinating. We've just covered the celebrations in 2015 of Magna Carta, and I'm really looking at this book in terms of its significance to the common law. The title of the book is Law, Liberty and the Constitution, a brief history of the common law, and it's been written by Harry Potter. The book comes from Boydell Press, and my wife Elizabeth and I have given it the following review. From Anglo-Saxon times to today, the turbulent and tumultuous history of the English common law, because that's what this book is about. Let's have a look at it first of all. Here it is. That's the book. There's the spine, and then there's a bit on the back. I think we get the general picture very quickly what this is all about. The book is heavy, actually. There's a picture of the author, Selwyn College, Cambridge, and you've got an index, 350 pages or so. There we go. That's the index right at the back. And as to be expected with this, it's a very detailed index. And what you have got then is a very detailed bibliography as well, which is also very helpful because it shows the tremendous amount of scholastic endeavour that has actually gone into this book. Now at the front of the book, let me show you the spine, the dust cover. That's the actual basic commentary about the book there. And as I say, you've seen a picture, the trial of Charles I is actually the picture on the bottom there in Westminster Hall. Now the front of the book is there. Then you've got a very nice dedication, which I shall just show there, and then you've got after that the contents of the book, running all the way through, laying down the law, year 600 onwards to 1500, and then the more modern aspects of the rule of law right at the end. Then lots of illustrations. It's a lovely book, this one. A lot of famous people actually mentioned. You've got people such as Charles I, a very large number of legal luminaries appearing as well. Marshall Hall's mentioned, Robert Peel, Norman Burkitt and so forth. Then you've got an introduction there with a nice little quote, and then after that you get into the book itself. And what you've got in the book, you've got quite a lot of footnoting, which links in nicely with the bibliography, and then running through the book again you can see the huge amount of detail has gone in. That's Thomas à Becket. Then running through Erskine, the tongue of Cicero, Thomas Erskine, again, and then right towards the back, the rule of law under threat, which is something we would be expecting in any book at the moment, certainly from an academic, about the way in which the government are behaving towards the rule of law, legal aid and so forth. It's all part and parcel of our great debate on how we go about our legal business. But this is fascinating because it is a history book, effectively, and it's one that I, certainly because I've always liked the historic aspects of the common law and the way in which the history of English law has developed. It's very much part and parcel of the rather greater picture of your understanding of English law rather than the specific areas you have to study for an exam. So this is something I think people will find very much of interest when they've probably done quite a bit of study themselves and been as I have, a practitioner for decades. We get to a point where it's nice to read something refreshing. And this is so well written too, which of course I expected to be from Harry Potter, let's put it that way. Now this is what we say anyway about the book. If anyone from parts of the world that Shakespeare would have called less happier lands ever asks you about our common law, you can tell them it's a long story, some 1500 years long to be reasonably precise, and it's told with verve and vigour and rigorous scholarship here in this really quite enthralling book. Been published by Boydell Press, and the book reveals page after page that the story of the common law contains many stories within it too numerous to recount, but taken as a whole they hold up a mirror to the constitutional history of England and the continuing struggle over the centuries to establish a workable system of justice and the rule of law, often against fierce and implacable opposition. And the author Harry Potter is an academic barrister and a former fellow of Selwyn College, Cambridge. And he's pointed out that the development of the common law owed much to the English kings and their judiciary, who in the 12th century created a unified system of law predating that of any other European country, based on a significant extent to Anglo-Saxon tradition, that of course being custom, although William the Conqueror did get rid of a lot of it, as I'm sure you probably will be aware. If it were at all possible to summarise the narrative thread of this book, you could safely say that it traces the development of the common law from around AD 600 to AD 2014, basically from the Anglo-Saxon bodies of law called dooms to the developments of the present day. And I would say, it's not mentioned in our review, but I would say Alfred the Great must have had a tremendous impact, because he of course could read and write, and it did make a difference, because looking at the dates before then, it was really a difficult period to get any idea of what was going on. But that really is where the turning point comes. And it's interesting, having said that, I'll just go back a bit, it's interesting that the earliest extant code comes from the reign of King Ethelbert of Kent, and he was the first Christian Anglo-Saxon monarch. And that's about 602 AD. So we are going back a bit from the various other people. And it is no coincidence, says Potter, that Ethelbert set down his code shortly after St. Augustine arrived in Canterbury and converted him to Christianity. Then you get to, I think, a turning point with Alfred the Great, and then other turning points over the centuries. So travelling from Rome, Augustine introduced Ethelbert not only to the tradition of Roman law, but the Mosaic laws in the Bible, which also contain the forensic wisdom of Solomon, the advocacy of Jesus, and the Last Judgment. And that's again very important, because there is a very strong religious tradition, I'm sure you are aware of that, in even just take the Law of Tort and Donahue and Stevenson. You can see the basic concepts of the neighbour principle, for instance. And so, with its roots in ancient wisdom, the common law has kept on renewing itself century after century, and it's hoped will continue to do so, maintaining England's, actually Britain's, traditions as a law-abiding country. And in the space of 1,000 years, says the author, English law has evolved from a rough code to settle disputes, constrain feuds and keep the peace, into an institution used to bring a king to justice, or so many thought or asserted. The most spectacular examples, of course, of bringing a tyrannical king to justice include, in what has just been the anniversary year of Magna Carta, the only temporary submission of King John by the barons of Runnymede, of which much has been written, of course, during 2015, and of course the execution of Charles I, a cataclysmic event which still excites controversy today. If you happen to be a barrister at Gray's Inn, you might be interested to know that the prosecutor at the trial of Charles I was a barrister at Gray's Inn. His name was John Cook, and although not the first choice for the task, proved equal to it nevertheless. And in an astonishing encounter between prosecutor and accused, the king apparently struck John Cook twice with his cane, an assault which the enigmatic prosecutor staunchly ignored and undeterred carried on prosecuting, you might say. Upon hitting John Cook a third time, the silver tip of Charles's cane was seen to fall off, and the king placed in the humiliating position of having to bend down and pick it off the floor himself, an omen of a pending doom if ever there was one, and duly noted with varying degrees of amazement and horror by the spectators there assembled. And this is in Westminster Hall, still there today. You can see the little plaque on the floor. The book fairly bristles with anecdote after startling anecdote such as this, with the focus generally on specific cases and judicial decisions. The narrative reveals any number of illuminating insights into the often shadowy corners of the history of the common law and its extraordinary evolution. The common law, says Potter, is the spinal cord of the English body politic, and we are further reminded that it persists as one of the great legal systems of the world, even though subjected to continuing threats by expediency and vested interests up to and including the present day. And as Scottish-born barrister, broadcaster and campaigner Helena Kennedy has said, "There is nothing that can beat it." Thank you, Helena. Let me conclude by saying this. General readers, as well as lawyers, particularly in common law jurisdictions, can consider themselves fortunate that this distinguished brief history has indeed brought the English common law to life. He has done that, and I'm really very grateful because I love the subject myself, and I'm sure many, many people do too. They find it very interesting. This is an eminently readable book. Here it is again. It's a nice book. It's a heavy book. It's obviously got illustrations in various sorts, but I'm very pleased with it. I think it's a great contribution. For instance, here's Thomas Erskine. Let's just have a nice look at him. We've got lots of other people who appear in various different places throughout the book. But I do think, for instance, we've got here, there's Edward Marshall Hall, for instance. Very dapper. There's the book. By the way, there's a new biography of Marshall Hall coming out in 2016. There's the front cover again, the spine, and then you've got the back. Thank you very much to Harry and to Boydell Press. It's an excellent book. Do have a look at the review we've written in the press and on the web. And thank you very much indeed for a great contribution to the history of English law. Very helpful. I think all students of law should read this book. They'll find it a great insight into where we are at the moment. Thank you. Bye-bye.